If you remember from last week, if you were here, we mentioned really quickly one of the ways that the book of Judges is organized is to show the effects of covenant obedience and covenant disobedience. And so we looked at sort of a three-stage process. I know it's a super big, long shot, but does anybody remember that three-step process? It's actually fairly obvious. The first one is, what is God's word of command and promise? Okay, what is God's word of command and promise? That's the first step of that process. The second is, what is man's response? Okay, so God gives a command and promise. He says, do this, and if you do that, here's what I promise. Then the second thing is, what is man's response? So is it obedience or disobedience? And then the third thing is, what is God's evaluation? Okay, what is God's evaluation? So if man is obedient, right, God's evaluation is blessing. If man is disobedient, God's evaluation is a curse, is punishment. And so that's like that structure, just that very basic three-step process or structure kind of gets repeated multiple times through the book of Judges. We're going to see it in the very opening section here in chapter 1 very obviously, and hopefully the plan is to get through the first two steps of that process. What is God's word of command and promise, and what is man's response tonight? So we also, we looked at our outline for the book last week. So we looked at how there's three basic sections to the book. So anyone remember what those three basic sections are? Yeah, so there's an introduction, okay? Then the body of the book, the conclusion, or the appendix, or the appendices. Okay, so those are the three main sections. The part in the middle, the big, like the body of the book, is where it gets its name, because that's where all the judges are. The 3 and a bit chapter intro, there are no mention of judges. In like the 5 or so chapter appendix at the end of the book, there are no judges. But it's that big part in the middle, the body of the book, where all the judges are. So there's the three main sections, but then we broke it down just a little bit further, and this is the outline we're going to use for the book, is to look at it in a series of pairs. Okay, so there's two introductions. We're looking at most of the first introduction tonight. Then there's two exemplary judges. And then there are, let me get this right, 2 unlikely judges, then 2 compromised judges, and then there's the 2 appendices at the end. And so interspersed in there's a bunch of the minor judges that get like 1 or 2 verses each, but that's the essential outline of the book. 2 introductions, 2 exemplary judges, that's Othniel and Gideon, 2 unlikely, Othniel and Ehud, then 2 unlikely judges, that's Gideon and Deborah, and then 2 compromised judges, Jephthah and Samson, and then the appendices at the end. So this week, like I say, we're going to cover most of the first of the 2 introductions. And so we're calling it From Conquest to Compromise. And we're actually, next week is also going to be From Conquest to Compromise, because this week we're kind of only looking at the conquest part, and next week we'll look at the compromise part. So, God's command and promise. So the first step in that 3-step process. So verses 1 and 2 of Judges chapter 1 says, after the death of Joshua, the people of Israel inquired of the Lord, who shall go up first for us against the Canaanites to fight against them? The Lord said, Judah shall go up. Behold, I have given the land into his hand. So the book begins with the initial conquest of the land under Joshua having been completed. So the land has been parceled out to the tribes, and what remains is an extensive mopping up operation. Okay, so the conquest is done. The people have gone into the land, right? They've marched around Jericho. They've taken huge portions of the promised land. And so this first portion of the book of Judges is going to actually kind of go back and revisit some of the initial conquest. And then the rest of the book of Judges is sort of, like I say, this extensive mopping up operation. Okay, the main battle's been won. The promised land has been taken. but there are still Canaanites in the land. And so each of the individual tribes needs to sort of drive out the remaining Canaanites from their particular portions of the land that they've inherited. So the people inquire of the Lord about who should go in first and lead the war against the Canaanites. And predictably, God gives Judah this privilege. So why is it predictable or somewhat obvious that it would be Judah who gets this honor? Well, it's Judah, if you remember, who in Genesis 49 receives from his father Jacob a special blessing. So does anyone know the special blessing that Judah in particular gets from his father Jacob? Yes, so it says, the scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet until Shiloh come, and to him shall be the obedience of the peoples. So it's Judah who, all the way back in Genesis 49, is predicted, and is prophesied that they're going to be the royal tribe, right? The tribe of the king, the tribe of the Messiah, the one who shall command obedience of the people. So when they inquire of the Lord, it's like I say, somewhat predictable, but it's Judah that is given this privilege and this honor of being the first to go up and to fight against the Canaanites. And so this process of inquiring of the Lord, right? What does that mean? What exactly were they doing when they inquired of the Lord? Well, what it's referring to is the ephod that the high priest wore. So this breastplate that the high priest wore, and it contained 12 stones, one for each of the 12 tribes of Israel. So when there was a question about who should do this or who should do that, like which tribe should be the one to do something, they would consult the high priest who was wearing this ephod, and somehow, we don't actually know how, but somehow God would indicate through the ephod his answer to that question. So some scholars think that one of the stones would light up. Some think that it would heat up. We don't know. We really have no idea. But in this particular instance, the answer that God gives to the question that they have is Judah. So that's what's going on there when it says that they inquired of the Lord. So these opening verses give us God's word of command and promise. Like we said, that first step of that process of determining, right, what happens with covenant obedience or disobedience. And so the command and promise is destroy the Canaanites. That's the command, right? Drive them out of the land. And the promise is I will be with you. So something that, though, has to be addressed pretty much every time we find ourselves looking at, right, Judges or Joshua or any of the Old Testament history books is, is God commanding genocide here? Is he commanding, was it right for God to command the destruction of the Canaanite people? So the short answer, and that's the only answer really we have time for tonight because it's not really essential to what we're looking at tonight, but the short answer is yes, God was right in commanding the destruction of the Canaanites. And it's yes because the iniquity of the Canaanite people had been filled up. So if we look back at Genesis 15, verse 16, we're told that during Abraham's time, God spared the Canaanite people. He didn't wipe them out at that time because, he says, their iniquity had not yet been filled up. But now, when the people are going into the land, we're told that, yes, the time has come. Their iniquity has been filled up. The cup of God's wrath has been filled up, and so they need to be wiped out or driven out. And so, like the civilization that lived before the flood, right? Same thing. Their iniquity had been filled up, and so God wiped them out with the flood. And this time, the instrument of God's wrath, rather than a flood, is his people. His people, Israel, are the instrument that God's going to use to either wipe them out or drive them out. And so it's their responsibility, Israel's responsibility, and their duty before God to purify the land by removing them or driving them out or destroying them. So, what is Israel's response to this command by God? Like I said, initially, it's faithfulness. So let's read verse 3 there. It says, "And Judah said to Simeon his brother, 'Come up with me into the territory allotted to me, that we may fight against the Canaanites, and I likewise will go with you into the territory allotted to you.' So Simeon went with him." So Simeon goes along with Judah in this initial battle. Because of a previous curse, the tribe of Simeon had no inheritance of its own in the land, and its blessing will come through the royal tribe of Judah. So let me read Joshua 19, verse 9, and it kind of explains what I just said there. It says that the inheritance of the people of Simeon formed part of the territory of the people of Judah. Because the portion of the people of Judah was too large for them, the people of Simeon obtained an inheritance in the midst of their inheritance. Okay, so ironically enough, and I kind of see why some commentators actually believe that this is really the first step towards compromise, right? It's Judah that's commanded to be the ones to, you're the first one, go in and fight the Canaanites, and he sort of shirks his responsibility and gets Simeon to go along and fight with him. And I understand that interpretation because, sort of one of the main themes of the book of Judges is compromise in terms of God's commands. But I really don't think that's actually what's going on here, because we have to look, why was Simeon cursed in the first place? Why did Simeon have no inheritance in the land? Does anyone know where that comes from?
The inhabitants, the edge of the sword, the innocent
the Shechemites. Yeah. So back in Genesis 34, Jacob's, right? So all the 12 tribes are the 12 sons of Jacob, and so one of Jacob's daughters, Dinah, is taken by Shechem, and he rapes her, and he takes her and wants to marry her. And so the sons of Jacob are obviously upset and indignant that this has happened. And so Shechem's father, Hamor, he tries to make peace, sort of be the peacemaker in the whole situation. So he offers to Jacob sons and daughters, and he says, look, here are my sons and daughters. Let's have your sons and daughters marry my sons and daughters. We can live in this land together in peace. And then he also offers a huge bride price for Dinah, so that his son Shechem can, lawfully take her as his wife. And so what the sons of Jacob do, specifically Simeon and Levi, they trick Hamor and they say, look, that all sounds good, except for one thing. It would be a disgrace for us, for our people, to let our sister marry into your family because you're all uncircumcised, right? So you're not part of the covenant. We can't marry outside of the covenant. And so Hamor agrees, and he says, okay, if that's what it takes, then all the males in Shechem will get circumcised, and here's the result of what happens there. So I'm going to read Genesis 34, 25 to 30. It says, on the third day, when they were sore, obviously, two of the sons of Jacob, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brothers, took their swords and came against the city while it felt secure and killed all the males. They killed Hamor and his son Shechem with the sword and took Dinah out of Shechem's house and went away. The sons of Jacob came upon the slain and plundered the city because they had defiled their sister. They took their flocks and their herds, their donkeys, and whatever was in the city and in the field. All their wealth, all their little ones and their wives, and all that was in the houses they captured and plundered. Then Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, you have brought trouble on me by making me stink to the inhabitants of the land, the Canaanites and the Perizzites. My numbers are few, and if they gather themselves against me and attack me, I shall be destroyed, both I and my household. All right, so Simeon and Levi actually use the sign of the covenant, circumcision, to do this wicked thing. right, exacting personal revenge on an entire city. And so in Genesis 49, remember, this is the same place that Judah is blessed with the blessing of, you'll be the one through whom, the scepter shall not leave your house, and you'll be the royal tribe. This is the cursing that Simeon and Levi get instead of a blessing. So Jacob says, Simeon and Levi are brothers. Weapons of violence are their swords. Let my soul come not into their counsel. O my glory, be not joined to their company. For in their anger they killed men, and in their willfulness they hamstrung oxen. Cursed be their anger, for it is fierce, and their wrath, for it is cruel. I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. So not long after that, we find out, right, because it's both Simeon and Levi that this happens to, that this curse is given to. And so we find out pretty quick how Levi becomes, it sort of receives salvation out of this cursed position, right? Because Levi, being Aaron's tribe, becomes the priestly tribe. And so this is what Moses says in Deuteronomy 33, 8-11. He says, give to Levi your Thummim and your Urim to your godly one, whom you tested at Massa, with whom you quarreled at the waters of Meribah, who said of his father and mother, I regard them not. He disowned his brothers and ignored his children, for they observed your word and kept your covenant. They, speaking of the tribe of Levi, shall teach Jacob your rules and Israel your law. They shall put incense before you and whole burnt offerings on your altar. Bless, O Lord, his substance, and accept the works of his hands. Crush the loins of his adversaries, of those who hate him, that they rise not again. So in exchange for their priestly duties, right, teaching the law to the house of Jacob, so to all of Israel, and performing the sacrifices before the Lord. In exchange for that, they're able to enter the land even though they don't have an inheritance, right? So they don't actually have a land of their own, a place that they can go into like all the other tribes. So what happens is, in every single one of the tribes' portions of land, a Levitical city is set up. And so that's where the Levites get to go, right? So the promise, the curse that is, that they'll be scattered throughout the land of Israel that Jacob gave is still true. They are scattered throughout the land in these Levitical cities, but it gives them a place to go. And so we'll note, actually, in Judges, as we kind of move along the study, that one of the reasons for the mess of the people during this period of the Judges is that, and we mentioned it a little bit last week, when we talked about the appendices at the end of the book, the reason that they're in such a mess is that the Levites had failed in their duties, right? Their duties to teach the law to the people and to offer sacrifices. So they failed to guard the morality of the people by not teaching them the law properly, and they failed to guard the worship, allowing idol worship and false gods to replace Yahweh and things like that. So nevertheless, Levi is able to enter the land, because their tribe is sort of scattered throughout the whole land in these Levitical cities. So how is Simeon able to enter the land? So as we read in Joshua 19, Simeon attaches themselves to Judah. And in doing so, they receive a section or a portion of the allotment given to Judah. Okay, because Judah is given a huge portion of the land, much bigger than any of the other tribes. And so it even says there right in Joshua 19, because the portion of Judah was too much for them. So Simeon, by attaching themselves to the tribe of Judah, are actually given a section of Judah's inheritance. And so they receive salvation, essentially, and blessing through Judah. And so one of the blessings is that they will actually become part of, we looked at this in our Old Testament survey, but when the kingdoms split, right, north and south, Simeon, because they're attached to Judah, will become part of the southern kingdom, and they'll actually be spared the Assyrian conquering and captivity that the 10 tribes in the north are faced with. So in order to sort of, I think, earn their keep with Judah, right? If they're gonna get a portion of Judah's inheritance, it only makes sense that they go up with Judah to fight the Canaanites. And I think that's what's going on here, right? Rather than putting feelings and family before the covenant, right? That's kind of what got them cursed in the first place. They were taking revenge on these people for what they did to their sister. Now Simeon is judging righteously and keeping, faithfully keeping the covenant by obeying God and driving the Canaanites out of the land. So that's why Simeon goes with Judah. Let's read verse 4 down to verse 8. It says, "Then Judah went up, and the Lord gave the Canaanites and the Perizzites into their hand, and they defeated 10,000 of them at Bezek. And they found Adoni-Bezek at Bezek and fought against him and defeated the Canaanites and the Perizzites. Adoni-Bezek fled, but they pursued him and caught him and cut off his thumbs and his big toes. And Adoni-Bezek said, 70 kings with their thumbs and their big toes cut off used to pick up scraps under my table. As I have done, so God has repaid me. And they brought him to Jerusalem, and he died there. And the men of Judah fought against Jerusalem and captured it and struck it with the edge of the sword and set the city on fire." So this first victory of Judah is against Adoni-Bezek. He was ruling over 70 kings, the nations, and faces eye for an eye retribution at the hands of Judah. So Judah's victory over Bezek is representative of God's conquering the world in general. Okay, this is how God operates. All right, so we're told that Adoni-Bezek ruled over 70 kings. And so 70, again, as we talked about this in the introduction, there's a lot of symbolism in Judges in terms of the numbers specifically. And so the number 70 carries some significant symbolic meaning in the Old Testament. And it's the number that's used to refer to the nations of the world. Okay, we see that in the first place in the table of nations in Genesis 10 lists 70 nations as representative of the entire world. And so we're told that Adoni-Bezek has 70 kings picking up scraps under his table with their thumbs and their big toes cut off. And so symbolically then, Bezek is a world ruler, right? He's a satanic figure ruling over the nations, right? Because that's what Satan does. And so Judah then comes in and he defeats 10,000 of his men. So again, likely not a literal number, literal in terms of it was probably around 10,000, but by rounding it off to 10,000, again, a very symbolic number, specifically in the Old Testament, that refers to completeness. Okay, so when you talk about destroying 10,000 of something, it's completely destroyed. It's completely wiped out. And so what happens, right? Judah goes in, completely wipes out Adoni-Bezek, and liberates the Gentile nations of the world. Right? So if we like I say, this is very symbolically represents how God conquers and operates in the world in general, right? In the future, at least in terms of in the future compared to Judges, not for us, but it will be who, right? The Lion of the tribe of Judah, who will come and defeat Satan, the ruler of the Gentile nations of the world, completely, utterly defeating him at the cross, liberating the Gentile nations from under his influence and deception. Right? That's how God wins his victories, and we see a picture of that here in Judges. So Bezek, or Adoni-Bezek, is brought to the city of Jerusalem and dies there. And so a lot of commentators, just because this sort of is something that our modern sensibilities they don't deal with this well. When we talk about his thumbs and his big toes being cut off, we assume that Judah was being cruel or unwarranted in doing that. But if you read the text and just take it at face value, it in no way actually suggests that Judah did anything wrong in doing this. In fact, it suggests that it was actually an act of divine justice, right? An example of the biblical principle of the lex talionis, or eye for an eye. So Bezek actually himself admits and accepts that this was a just punishment, right? I have done this to 70 kings, and now, thus it is done to me. God has repaid me. So there's actually no reason to believe or to suggest that it was inappropriate or it was cruel or unwarranted. It was eye for an eye punishment. And so the defeat of Bezek, or this world ruler, the enemy of God, has happened, and now God builds his city. Right? Again, that pattern of how Bezek was defeated, we can kind of take it another step now, where this kind of culminates in the New Testament, right? After Christ, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, defeats Satan, defeats the dragon, the New Jerusalem is then set up. So it's unsurprising then, I think, that it's to Jerusalem that Bezek is taken, or Adonai Bezek is taken, and where he eventually dies. So really, just a really interesting little story there. And again, just want to emphasize that because passages have symbolic meaning, because God is the author, we talked about this, because God is the author of both the text itself through the inspiration of the human author and the author of the history that the author is writing about, God can do both, right? He can have symbolic meaning and be telling something that actually truly happened in history. There's no reason that those two things are incompatible. So let's continue. Verse 9 says, "And afterward the men of Judah went down to fight against the Canaanites who lived in the hill country, in the Negeb, and in the lowland. And Judah went against the Canaanites who lived in Hebron. Now the name of Hebron was formerly Kiriath Arba. And they defeated Sheshai and Ahiman and Talmai. So Judah continues to fight the Canaanites and conquer territory, including defeating giants at Hebron." Defeating giants at Hebron. So we'll talk about that in a second. But verse 9 continues to show us the initial success, the initial faithfulness of Judah. And I meant to say this earlier, but just so nobody gets confused, when Judges talks about, and Judah did this and Simeon did this, it's using it sounds like these are individual people, but it's the tribe that is being spoken of as a whole. So when it says that Judah went and defeated Adonai Bezek, it's the tribe, not Judah, right? Judah's long dead at this point. Judah, the son of Jacob, is long dead. So just so nobody gets confused. So when we talk about the success and the faithfulness of Judah, we're talking about the tribe. And so they fought the Canaanites wherever they found them, right? It tells us that they fought them in the hill country, in the Negeb, so that's the south country, right? The Negeb is like the southernmost point of Israel. And they fought them in the lowlands. It didn't matter where. Everywhere they found them, they fought them and they defeated them. And then not only that, but these weren't just any Canaanites that they're defeating here in these verses, right? These are actually giants. Okay, so the Canaanite name for the city of Hebron was Kiriath Arba. So Kiriath means city, and Arba means 4, the number 4. So this could mean that Hebron was somewhat of a metropolis, right? Sort of a sprawling city that maybe sort of encompassed like 4 smaller towns or something, right? Like sort of like we call, the Tri-City area sort of thing. So it could have been that. But Arba is also the name of the father of the Anakim. Okay, so anyone know who the Anakim are? or Anakim in the Old Testament? What's special about those people? They're big. They're giants. Okay, they're giants. So the Anakim are those who, when the people of Israel sent spies into the land initially to sort of scout out the land and see what was going on, it was the Anakim who they were afraid of, and the reason that the 10 of the 12 spies brought back a negative report and the people didn't enter the land because they were giants and they were terrified. And so Joshua chapter 14, verse 15, actually calls Arba, okay, this man Arba, he calls him the father and the greatest among the Anakim. And so now we're here at this town called Kiriath Arba, the city of Arba. And not only that, but the three tribes that are defeated by Judah here in Judges are Sheshai, Ahiman, and Talmai. And so Numbers 13:22 tells us that all three of those cities, which are likely named after these three men that I'm going to read to you about in a second, they are all descendants of Arba, and therefore Anakim, or giants themselves. So Numbers 13:22. I'm going to read it here, but if you want to turn to it, I'm going to read verse 22 and verse 28. So Numbers 13:22 says, "They went up into the Negeb and came to Hebron. And," so here's the three names, "Ahiman, Sheshai, and Talmai, the descendants of Anak, were there. However, the people who dwell and so this is verse 28, "However, the people who dwell in the land are strong, and the cities are fortified and very large. And besides, we saw the descendants of Anak there." Okay, so this is part of the report of the spies and why they were afraid to go into the land, talking about the same people, the same Anakim, these same three descendants of Arba, but none of the fear that paralyzed the spies in the first place and caused the older generation to not enter the land stops Judah now, right? Judah faithfully goes in and defeats all of these enemies. And so Hebron was one of the cities that was supposed to be set up in the land as a sanctuary city. And so the principle here, one of the principles is, in the book of Judges, if we want sanctuary, then first the giants need to be destroyed. Right? However, in this particular story, we are far more like the older generation, the spies going into the land, than we are faithful Judah, right? We're unwilling and unable to achieve victory over the giants on our own, right? So we need a champion to win the initial victory and give us the strength to fight our battles. So here in Judges, the champion, so to speak, that the people need is sort of broadly described as faithful Judah, as the royal tribe of Judah, right? The future tribe of the Messiah. However, the same exact event here in Judges 1 is also recorded in Joshua chapter 14. And so there we find that it's not just the tribe of Judah in general that is sort of the champion that goes and defeats these giants, that there's an even more sort of specific person and reason that these giants are defeated at Hebron, and that's Caleb. That's Caleb. So if you remember Caleb, he, along with Joshua, Caleb and Joshua were the other two spies, right? So there's 12 spies that went into the land. 10 of them came back with a negative report, said it's too much, the people are too big, the cities are too fortified. But Caleb and Joshua came back and basically just said, so what, right? We've got God on our side. What's the big deal? And so the entire generation that Caleb and Joshua were a part of died in the wilderness, right? God did not allow them to enter the land. They had to wander the wilderness for 40 years until that entire generation died off. And Caleb and Joshua were the only ones of that generation whom God allowed to enter the land. And so after wandering the wilderness for 40 years, okay, imagine Caleb, who went in, who spied out the land, is one of only two people, he and Joshua, who has seen the promised land. At this point, Israel has wandered in the wilderness for 40 years. He's seen the land flowing with milk and honey, and he's just chomping at the bit for his chance to get into the land and take what's rightfully his. And so here is Caleb's request to Joshua just as they're about to go into the land, and it's one of the best, greatest speeches in the entire Bible. So this is what Caleb asks of Joshua, because at this point, when the people enter the land, Joshua has been given sort of the leadership of the people because Moses has died. So this is what he says in Joshua chapter 14, starting in verse 6. Caleb says, Then the people of Judah came to Joshua at Gilgal, and Caleb, the son of Jephunneh the Kenizzite, said to him, You know what the Lord said to Moses, the man of God, at Kadesh Barnea, concerning you and me. I was 40 years old when Moses, the servant of the Lord, sent me from Kadesh Barnea to spy out the land, and I brought him word again as it was in my heart. But my brothers who went up with me made the heart of the people melt. Yet I wholly followed the Lord my God. And Moses swore on that day, saying, Surely the land on which your foot has trodden shall be an inheritance for you and your children forever, because you have wholly followed the Lord my God. And now, behold, the Lord has kept me alive, just as he said these 45 years since the time that the Lord spoke this word to Moses. So he's 85 years old now. I am still as strong today as I was in the day that Moses sent me. My strength now is as my strength was then, for war and for going and coming. And now give me this hill country of which the Lord spoke on that day, for you heard on that day how the Anakim were there with great fortified cities. It may be that the Lord will be with me, and I shall drive them out just as the Lord said. Then Joshua blessed him and gave Hebron to Caleb the son of Jephunneh for an inheritance. Therefore Hebron became the inheritance of Caleb the son of Jephunneh the Kenizzite to this day, because he wholly followed the Lord, the God of Israel. Now the name of Hebron formerly was Kiriath Arba. Arba was the greatest man among the Anakim, and the land had rest from war. So, just one of my favorite, coolest little snippets in the Old Testament, this 85-year-old Caleb, been wandering the wilderness for 40 years, wanted to enter the land 40 years ago when he first spied it out, saw all these giants, couldn't have cared less, wanted to go in, and now is given the chance, and Joshua says, what do you want? Take whatever you want, and he says, give me Hebron. I want those giants. And he goes, and he takes it, and he wins the victory, and Hebron, at the time of when Joshua was written, it says that Hebron was still, the inheritance of Caleb's family to that day. Super cool. Now, we get to the next verse, in verse 11, and it says, From there they went against the inhabitants of Debir. The name of Debir was formerly Kiriath Sepher. Okay, so we're moving from the focus sort of shifts away from Hebron. So we've seen Caleb. Again, Judges says that it was the tribe of Judah specifically that conquered Hebron, but we know really it was Caleb through the likely with an army from the tribe of Judah, but it was Caleb that sort of led the charge against Hebron and took all those cities away from the Anakim. Now the focus shifts to this city of Debir. And so the name Debir means word. And then the older name of Debir, which is Kiriath Sepher, means, again, remember Kiriath means city, and so Sepher means books. So Debir means word, Kiriath Sepher means city of books. And so likely, scholars think that this was probably a large library city of sorts, right? A place where documents were stored, a place where the philosophical books, the genealogical records, the trading records, the land ownership documents, all of these things likely were stored in this city. And so destroying a place like this would be a devastating blow to a civilization, right? An ancient civilization that doesn't have a printing press, right? Can't reproduce their literature, and they don't have their accounting stored, on their hard drive from the past 25 years as far as who owns what land and things like that. So destroying a city like this is a devastating, if not a death blow, to the Canaanite civilization. So you can imagine this would be a very well-fortified, well-protected, well-guarded city. So verse 12 says, "And Caleb said, 'He who attacks Kiriath-Sepher,' or Debir, 'and captures it, I will give him Achsah, my daughter, for a wife.' And Othniel, the son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother, captured it, and he gave him Achsah, his daughter, for a wife. When she came to him, she urged him to ask her father for a field. And she dismounted from her donkey, and Caleb said to her, 'What do you want?' She said to him, 'Give me a blessing, since you have set me in the land of Negeb. Give me also springs of water.' And Caleb gave her the upper springs and the lower springs." So, back a couple, sorry. Caleb offers his daughter to whoever is brave enough to go and capture the city of Debir. So Othniel accepts the challenge, and he wins the victory, and he's rewarded with a wife. So up until this point, right, we've talked about how Caleb went and was sort of an individual person who went and we're told defeated a city. But Judges doesn't talk about Caleb doing that. It just says that Judah did that. So up until this point in the book of Judges, we only have sort of corporate entities like Judah or Simeon engaging the enemy as a group. So Othniel is the first one in Judges that we see sort of as this example of an individual person going and conquering and defeating the enemy. And so we're actually going to see in a couple chapters later, this Othniel character is going to be the first judge of Israel. But we're not going to talk about or look at that right now. For now, we just want to look at this neat little story of him winning his bride by defeating this Canaanite city. So Caleb, after conquering Hebron, offers as a reward to the man who would go up against and conquer Debir, he offers them his daughter Achsah. And so this is really a classic tale, right? This is sort of like fairy tale type stuff here, right? This is the knight in shining armor going and defeating the dragon and rescuing the girl sort of thing. There's a similar story in 1 Samuel of King David, right? Wins his bride, what's her name? Michal. In 1 Samuel, we see a similar story like that. It's kind of like almost like a pioneer story, right? This husband and wife who go in and they sort of conquer the land and tame the frontier. It's just really it's the thing stories are made of, fairy tales are made of. It's really neat little story. And we actually get it twice. So important that almost word for word, this story is also told in the book of Joshua. But the second half of the story moves from the conquest, right? Othniel, it just says that he goes in and he does the job. He defeats and captures the city of Debir. But then the second half moves from conquest to occupation. So Caleb blessed Achsah and Othniel with a fruitful and well-watered land. So everybody in this story, it wins, right? This is sort of like a win-win-win scenario, okay? So it's a shrewd move by Caleb, right? Because Caleb ensures that his daughter gets a good husband, right? He is guaranteed a husband for his daughter who is not only a courageous warrior, but he's a God-fearing man, right? Because nobody in their right mind who would actually think that in their own strength they can go up and defeat this city, right? They would only go up and attempt to defeat this city if they completely, totally believe that God is on their side. So he guarantees a courageous and God-fearing husband for his daughter. Othniel, right, he benefits because he gets clearly the wife that he knew Oxa, right? They're actually cousins, I think, right? Because Othniel is Caleb's nephew. What's that, sorry? It'd be his...
It says here that Othniel, the son of some guy, is Caleb's younger brother.
Othniel's, it's Kenaz, who is Caleb's younger brother. So Othniel is actually Caleb's nephew. So Caleb's, yeah, they'd be cousins. They'd be first cousins. So it sounds weird. It's not weird back then. Happened all the time. So they knew each other, right? It's not like this is an unknown commodity. So obviously there's something about this woman that when Caleb makes this offer, that Othniel is willing to go and conquer a city full of giants and is well fortified, and so he's winning a great wife, and Oxa wins because she gets a mighty warrior for a husband, a God-fearing man. So it's just this win-win-win scenario. Everybody kind of benefits from this, but especially when we look at just how the whole thing plays out, especially at the end with Oxa, right? She's a very godly woman, right? Obviously, like I said, if she wasn't, Othniel wouldn't have been interested in her in the first place. But then she proves it in the story, right? She's not satisfied with simply conquering the land, right? Othniel goes in, he does the conquering part, but then she's the one that pushes Othniel, like a godly wife should do. She pushes Othniel to take it one step further, and she says, go ask my father Caleb for a blessing. And so he does. He goes and he asks Caleb, and Caleb gives him this specific piece of land, this field. And then not only that, she doesn't stop there. She goes and she asks Caleb for a blessing. And she gets the blessing. And then she also says, Dad, look, we've got this land, but it's in the Negeb, and so the Negeb was notoriously a dry place, and so she said, look, we've got this land, but now we need some water. And so Caleb gives them some water. He gives them two springs, the upper spring and the lower spring. And so, again, very godly woman. This is what she should be doing as a helpmeet to Othniel. Yes, he's the big warrior conqueror, but then she's the one that sort of pushes. We don't just need to conquer. We actually we need to build up the land and turn it into this fruitful place. And so this we have for us really a picture. Think about of a father giving a bride to a faithful husband, and then when the bride, I would say, the church in this scenario, asks for a blessing, the father gives, and not only gives, but he gives abundantly. So verse 16, this is the last section that we'll read, says, and the descendants of the Kenite, Moses' father-in-law, went up with the people of Judah from the city of palms into the wilderness of Judah, which lies in the Negeb near Arad. And they went and settled with the people, and Judah went with Simeon his brother, and they defeated the Canaanites who inhabited Zephath and devoted it to destruction. So the name of the city was called Hormah. So the Kenites, this is your one blank that you should have there that I don't have on the screen. The Kenites, although not ethnically Israelite, attach themselves to Israel again through the tribe of Judah and live in the land. Okay, so the Kenites were a specific tribe of Midianites. They were Moses' in-laws, right? Remember, Moses goes after he flees Egypt. He marries this woman, Zipporah. Okay, and Zipporah was a Kenite. She was a Midianite, and her father Jethro was a descendant of Kenaz, and so he was a Kenite or a Kenizzite. And so in Numbers 10, 29 to 32, Moses convinces some of Jethro's family, his father-in-law, to go with them to the promised land. Not all of them, but some of them go to the promised land with Israel. However, right, anyone remember what tribe Moses is from? He's Aaron's brother. There's a hint. He's a Levite. Okay, Moses is a Levite, so he's convinced all these people to go. His in-laws to come with him to the land of Israel. But where are they going to go? Right? He's got no inheritance in the land. He's a Levite, so they have to attach themselves in some other way. And so what they do is they attach themselves to another tribe. Again, they choose this royal tribe of Judah to associate with. And the Canaanites are given a portion of the land of Judah, somewhat similar to what happens with Simeon. So what's significant about this? Well, both Caleb and his nephew / son-in-law, Othniel, are Kenites. Okay, so these faithful warriors, these men who went and defeated God's enemies, put their faith and trust in God to defeat the Anakim, the giants who the Israelites were all afraid of, they're not even ethnically Israelites, right? They did what all of their Israelite brethren refused to do. And so we see very, very early on that God's promises for the covenant are not just for Israel alone, right? They're for all those who put their faith in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and enter into covenant with him. It's not just sons of Abraham, ethnically or by blood, right? However, as we see with the destruction of the Canaanites, the choice is clear, right? It's not just for anybody willy-nilly. The choice is join with God's people and be saved, like the Canaanites, or war with God's people and be destroyed. And so that leads us to this last verse. And so the section concludes, this is your blank here, with the destruction of Hormah, which means placed under the ban or totally destroyed. So we don't have time, definitely not this week. So maybe I'll circle back around and we'll talk about this next week a little bit to discuss this idea of being placed under the ban or being devoted to destruction. So simply put, what that meant was that place, that city, was to be offered up to God as a whole burnt offering. Okay, there's no loot to be taken. The people benefit nothing from it. They don't get any of the animals. They don't get any of the loot. The entire city is to be destroyed and burned and devoted to destruction. So that's why this city is renamed Hormah, which is placed under the ban or totally destroyed. But just to conclude, one significant thing to note here is a reversal, right? We're told that it's both, again, in verse 17, it's Judah went with Simeon, his brother, and they defeated the Canaanites who inhabited Zephath and devoted it to destruction. And so we see a reversal, really, of Simeon's curse, right? His original curse was, or the reason he was originally cursed was because he used the covenant, the sign of the covenant, to do this awful thing. And so as part of his duties in the priestly nation of Israel, right, that's the entire nation was to be a nation of priests, not just the Levites, but priests to the entire world, witnessing God to the entire world. Here he faithfully carries out his priestly duties, right, by offering up the entire city of Hormah to God as a whole burnt offering devoted to destruction.